Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Although our original speaker, which I was really looking forward for Werner talk, so I'm kind of sad that I'm not going to be listening to him today, but we will make sure he'll come in the future when he'll have time. And we sure hope that you can enjoy today's talk. Can you see you cannot see the slide. Can you see the slides? Yes? Oh, okay.
Yeah, we can see the slide very well.
Thank you for confirming. All right. So Jenny asked me if I can update the news. I just got associate last week. I got promotion. I got my tenure approved, but we're not sure if we can actually say it. So, or put it on our signature. But anyway, so I am really happy to be here today. And I know I'm talking to people who already know about DUS, understand DUS, think that DUS is important. But I hope I'm also going to be able to give you all some new aspect today that will help you when you need to talk to other people who don't see DUS as important as we are. So we're going to talk about why we need to rethink how we evaluate the impact DUS in the US has on air quality and on our health. And to start with the fact that there has been some studies in the US that look into the impact of dust and health and dust and air quality. But I should say that many of these studies have been using the same database, which is the NOAA Dust Storm database. Very easy to use, very common. There has been multiple health studies, economical studies that people have been using with this database. But recently, Daniel Tom Gill and I published a paper where we examined this database. We really wanted to know how good it is, how reliable it is. And we found that there were 647 reports of dust storm in the database, and 165 of them couldn't be examined because we couldn't find any meteorological station nearby. So left us with 491 events that we could examine. And here you see a map of these reports. Now, the dust storm database is based on observation by people. It could be us driving on the road and seeing something and reporting it. It could also be an observer. And what we found when we examined each one of these 400 reports is only 38% of them were really confirmed as dust storm, and majority of them were not dust storm. You can see here that 50% should have been called blowing dust or dust event, where the visibility is above 1 kilometer. So really, there's some problem in this database. Not just the fact that the data existing is problematic, but also the fact that there's a lot of dust storms that happen around the US and they're not in the database. Just to give you an example, El Paso in Texas, which is located here, is not even mentioned in this database. And we know that they have dust storm. So this, just highlight that if you're using this database, just be mindful to pay attention what you're using. And this bring me to basically the concept that we need database. We need to know when dust occur, how they occur. So this is a project funded by NSF, and this is something in a process. And I saw Tamidayo is here, and he's the graduate student who's working on this project. So what are we trying to do? We are going to create a database for dust event and dust storm, and we will make it available for everyone in the community to be able to use it. This is a work in progress. How are we doing it? As you know, there are many observational stations across the US, what we call automated surface observation systems, which are ESOS, and they provide a report. Their report contained different parameters from temperature, relative humidity, dew point, wind speed, wind gust, wind direction, pressure, visibility, precipitation, and also something known as the present weather code. Now, out of all these sensors, there are only 2,500 that actually were available to use from 2000 to 2020, and these are the ones that we're currently working on. So how does it look like? Like a text file. It has all the parameters inside. So for us to say a dust event happened, we need to have an increase of wind speed, above the 6 meter that is used by the World Meteorological Organization to start the saltation process. But we also need to see a reduction in visibility. As you can see here in an example from Lubbock from 2003, a sharp decrease in visibility as the wind speed increase. So these are the two main parameters that we need to have. What else? As I mentioned, there is an observer that can put information inside the station, and this is the present weather code. Now, if there is an observer, they will put one of the following code: BLDU, blowing dust event, DU, suspended dust, DS, dust storm, and sometimes they will put haze. But keep in mind, we found a lot of errors. We found in multiple locations across the US that BLDU has been put in, and that code has been running for 2 whole days, not really having any dust conditions. So we really need to be careful when we're looking at these databases. Also, majority of the ESSA stations that we have across the US are automated. If they're automated, we don't have an observer who would put any of these code. And then haze play a role. And haze can be put automatic by the station depending on the condition of the temperature, the dew point, and the visibility. But haze can also be put for real haze event, fire event. So every event that we are identified in the code, and here's some example, so you can see this code as part of the text file. Every event that we identify as a dust event, we need to confirm it. And how we're going to confirm it? We're going to confirm this database by using multiple methods. Increase of particulate matter, which we'll talk about in a few more slides and some of the problem that we have with that. Find dust concentration from Improve or CSN, identifying dust with AeroNet, satellite images, and also some database and publication that people have worked on, and social media. In the last few years, there's a lot of social media that people provide information about a dust event that they have seen. So with this information, we're hoping that in very few short years, we'll be able to provide our community a list of dust events that occur across the US with information on when they occur, how long they occur, and some of the aspect that I'll show you in a few more slides. But this we're hoping will be available even on Dana website, so you'll be able to take it. And I'm hoping that with this database, we will be able to get more and more accurate information about the impact of dust and air quality. But let's start talking about some of the issues related to health and air quality, because we need to understand what kind of stuff we need to take into account. But before I'll talk about that, I want to show you some examples of 2 locations that we've already finished analyzing and to talk about the impact that we can see. All right, so to comparison of 2 locations. In Arizona, we analyzed the dust event from 2005 to 2021. And in Lubbock, we did the same analysis from 2000 to 2020. There were 609 dust events in Lubbock, Texas for that period, and 535 for the same period for Lubbock, for Arizona. Now, for a long period of time, I was convinced that Phoenix would have much higher number of dust events compared to Texas. And when we compared the same period of time of 2005 to 2020, Lubbock win. We have way more dust here compared to Phoenix, Arizona. I should also mention that in Lubbock, the data is based on one single sensor. And in Phoenix, Arizona, we took multiple sensors in the Great Phoenix area. And from that, we created one database to understand the Great Phoenix area. So another thing we're seeing, these are the number of dust events each year. In Lubbock, we see an increasing trend where more dust happening over time. And in Phoenix, there's like slight decreasing trend over time. Now, with this information, we can identify when the dust happened, and we see the different pattern of month. Most of the dust in Phoenix, Arizona, happening during the summer, and in Lubbock, Texas, in spring and late summer. Most of the dust in both locations last less than an hour. And we need to remember that. We're going to talk about that aspect in terms of air quality. Now, every dust event that we identified, we're then looking at what were the meteorological conditions that initiate that dust event. Whether it was a synoptic, a more large-scale meteorological condition like front, cold front, cyclone genesis process, and just to see what were the conditions that initiated that dust event. So if it's not synoptic, we're looking to make sure, was it convective? Was there any dust or any storm that happened in the area? And when the precipitation evaporate, it creates strong winds. And when the wind hit the ground, it lifts some of the particles. In some of the cases, we would call these event haboubs, where we have this wall of dust that approaching. We see it a lot of news and social media in Great Phoenix area. So every dust event that we identify, we use different tools to create this identification. And we did that process for those two locations in Phoenix and in Arizona, and we see different things. Most of the dust in Arizona is convective, and majority of the dust in Lubbock is synoptic. Now, synoptic would mean that the dust have larger area that would be impacted, and it might last for longer. Convective dust events are very short, and the area impacted by them would be small. So this kind of information really tell us when did dust happen, what will be the impact. We also know the exact time of day that they can happen. So for example, in the case of Arizona, we can now go to Arizona and tell them, oh, during July and August, between 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., you should have a higher chance of dust events. So we recommend that you will add more nurses and doctors to the ER because more people might come to visit you because we know there's some aspect of people impacted by these dust events. We also examine the number of dust storm. And again, dust storm is when the visibility reduced below 1 kilometer. And there's way more dust storm in Phoenix, Arizona, compared to what we see in Lubbock, Texas, as you can see. So this information is going to be really meaningful, and we're hoping to be able to provide it for the entire US. Now, let's start talking about some of the problem. Some of the problem, as I mentioned here, is just the fact that a lot of us in the community call every dust event a dust storm, but the severity of them would be different. So we're sort of lacking the consistent use of definition when we talk about these things. So let's put the stuff on the table and be sure that we're all talking the same language. A dust event, which we have majority in the US, have visibility above 1 kilometer up to 10 kilometer. This is based on the World Meteorological Organization. And the dust storm would have visibility below 1 kilometer. Just to give you the example, this is a dust storm here in Lubbock from February. And this is my student who's filming while she's driving. And this is really bad. But just to show you the magnitude of how severe it can get. There's also a problem that some of us, and it's mainly in the news, we see people call a sandstorm. They call the event sandstorm. So we know that there's a difference between those mechanisms. And if we'll educate and start using the same correct term, it might help us with moving forward. Another problem that we've been seeing, dust events are not taken seriously enough, based mainly by policy and management decision. Just for example, the Clean Air Act allowed to remove dust storm and dust event from the database because they call them exceptional event, because they're natural event. But that's a problem. If we're not taking them seriously and we're removing them, we're not really going to understand the impact they will have. Just to give you an example from the last week, we had big fires here in Texas, and we had a dust event right the day before. There were no news, nothing about the dust event. But when the fire hit, all the schools got notes not to tell kids to go outside, kids to be careful. And in my brain, I was like, we just had a huge dust event the day before and you didn't put any notes. So it just showed that we're not taking it seriously. So we're not putting action because we want to protect our kids. We want to be sure that they will be safe. Now, most of the information I'm going to show in the next few slides, and part of this is coming from this new commentary that we published. Jenny, Katie, and myself worked on, and it's available on GeoHealth. So you can see some of the information there. All right. So how do we look at air quality? To define air quality, we need to understand the difference between the terms of particulate matter. Particulate matter talk about the aerosol, and we normally talk about PM 2.5 and PM 10. These are definitions that we talk in terms of their impact that they might have on health, and we'll talk about that aspect in a few more slides. So PM 2. If we have a single hair, and yes, this is a piece of my hair, just a curly one, and I'll take just a slice of a diameter. So this would be how PM 2.5 would look on it, and this would be on how PM 10. Now, to look at the impact on air quality, we are making measurement of these particulate matter, if it's PM 2.5 or PM 10. And this is an example when we look at the concentration and we see that concentration of, in this case, PM 2.5 increase up to a certain level, but we normally only look at the daily average. So here the daily average was 70 microgram per cubic meter, and then we compare it. We compare it to either the WHO, the World Health Organization threshold, a daily value for PM 2.5 and PM 10, or the EPA daily value for PM 2.5 and PM 10. Now, in this case, obviously, these were high concentration, so this they had better air quality. Another example from Israel, I love to show it because I was outside taking these measurements. So this is a photo that I took during my PhD. And you can see the concentration of PM10, how they increase, saturated to the highest that the instrument can measure, and PM 2.5. And again, these are the daily average, and they are way above the threshold that we know. So how do we measure these things in the US? We have thousands of 1,130 sensor active, at least for 2020, across the US. And majority of them are PM 2.5 sensor. We have some PM 10 sensor, as you can see here in red. We have location with both of these sensor, and we also have some spread of improve and CSN. Improve and CSN will measure a daily value, and all the other site can have an hourly average. And again, we're normally measuring the daily concentration and comparing it to the World Health Organization or the EPA threshold. And when it's above, we would say, oh, the day was polluted, so we have a problem. Let's start talking about some of the problems. Dust doesn't care where the sensor is. So just look at these examples where we have dust, and these dots represent the different sensors, but the dust is moving. But the dust is moving in location where we don't have sensor. So what does it mean? No sensor, no dust. We didn't measure it, so it didn't happen. And it's part of the problem. We don't have enough sensor. And if you can just look at this map, we have gaps of sensor in area that are considered hot for dust. So we don't have a way of measuring it. Even with the existing sensor in the existing location, we have some problem. For example, when we look at the improve or the CSN, we have some sampling frequency and duration that limit the ability to look at the impact of air quality. For example, improve and CSN collect sample every 3 days. So if a dust happen in between, we would not be able to see it. We will not monitor it, so we will not know it exists. Also, a lot of these measurements that are looking and identifying the dust are based on chemical composition. Most of the improve and CSN are only measuring chemical composition or chemical specific for PM 2.5, and there is nothing for PM 10. So without these additional measurement of PM 10 and trying to get the chemical aspect of this, we really can only speculate regarding to where the dust source, where the transport of these dust. Let's start talking about those locations when we have those PM sensor. One way that we can look at these measurements is we want to see the increase of particulate matter if we're looking at these values. And here's an example where both PM 2.5 and PM 10 increase, but another location when PM 2.5 didn't really increase, but PM 10 did. And this can tell us something about the source, how many coarse particle we have in each location. So we can look at the difference between them or the ratio between them, and we can learn about this information, but these are just the location when we have both of these sensors. So there's big gap in many locations when we don't have any sensor. We also don't do any measurement. No one is providing measurement on PM1, PM4, which are really crucial to look at the impact on health, on TSP, and there's also no information on side distribution. We don't really know how are the size of the particle change over time. And this is just an example. Here are other problem, and I'll start that understanding of a problem with this video. So this was taken here in Lubbock in 2011. If you're going to look on this side of the image, here it comes. So this is a big dust storm, a big chaboob that reached our station here in Lubbock in 2011. Now, if I'm looking at the PM 2.5, I can definitely see that increase. But daily average was 23.5, which is below the EPA threshold. It's also below the original WHO threshold. They just updated these in 2011. So if I would only look at the daily average to see if something happened, I am basically masking the value. I would not be able to detect it because averaging an event that happened on a very short period of time will not allow you to get the true impact that they have on air quality. Knowing that there's really not a lot of information here in Lubbock, that's what sort of pushed me forward to build AROS. AROS is Aerosol Observation Station. I built it and it's been operated since 2019. And in AROS, which located here on campus, we have different measurement. We measure different sizes of PM, PM1, PM 2.5, PM4, and PM10 every minute. And we also have information on the side distribution of particle from 250 nanometer up to more than 30 micron. We have ability to sample filter on particle on filter using the Harvard impactor, which are usually 24-hour gravimetric measurement. And very recently, we added low-cost sensor into our station, and we're currently in a calibration phase for a project with EPA. A high volume sampler, and here in the back is our reference monitor that has been placed but not fully operating yet. So this is a very, very recent photo and some of our advancement that we have in our current station. All right, so what kind of information we get from this AROS station and how can it help us to look at the impact on air quality? Here's an example of a synoptic dust event where we had an increase in wind speed and a decrease in visibility. And you can see here how the particle just continuous flow, and also a satellite image. In this video, we're going to have a convective event, very sharp decrease in visibility, sharp increase in wind speed. You saw the front of this gust, and you can also see this haboob here in this radar. So we had measurement during these 2 days, and we wanted to know which one of them was more problematic. So if I'm only looking at daily values, I would say, oh, the April day was much more significant and had a much larger impact compared to this June 5 convective event. Keep in mind, the synoptic lasted for 12 hours, the convective lasted for only 20 minutes. What I'm not showing you, which we don't get to see, is the standard deviation, how the value change over time. And for both of these cases, the standard deviation is enormous, much higher than the average itself, which is something we normally don't look at. What about the changes of particle over time? Here are hourly average of PM1, PM2.5, and PM10. So just looking at the hourly average, I would assume the synoptic dust event had much higher concentration of particle that had much larger impact on air quality compared to the convective dust event. Keep in mind, this event lasted for only 20 minutes, which means if I'm averaging over an hour, I'm sort of flattening the value. Because now what we can do with AROS is we can make short time period intervention of measurement. And if I'm averaging every 10 minutes, so these are the concentration every 10 minutes, I can now see that this convective dust event had much higher concentration. Now, for our lungs, it doesn't matter. If you're outside during this period and you breathe this particle in, they're going to go in. So it's something we need to start thinking about. The fact that most of the measurement are only hourly based, we don't get short period of time, and we're only looking at daily values, we're really not seeing the true impact dust event have on air quality. This is not just the case for Lubbock. We were able to do the same thing with Maricopa County. They provided us with raw data for PM values, and this is just one event. Hourly values for PM10 and PM 2.5, and the same sensor, just average over a 10-minute period. And again, you can see much higher concentration compared to what we would see. And again, if you're outside during those 10 minutes, 20 minutes when the dust occur, you're going to breathe these particles in. What about the particle sizes? You know, talking to people growing up in a place where dust is something common, I've been hearing the dust, oh, these are large particles, they're not a problem, but they are. These are the measurements from those same dust event that I showed you earlier for the synoptic and the convective. And in both of them, we see a much higher concentration at the dust event. So the black here are the peak of the dust, the highest concentration. The gray are the time right before the dust reached the station. And the light gray are the daily average. And you can see that during the dust event, we also have higher concentration of smaller particle. Smaller particle, smaller than 1 micron. These would be a size of particle that can go straight into our alveoli. So let's start talking about the health aspect. So we underestimate the fact that dust can contain a lot of small particles, which can go into our lungs. So here we know that the size of particle matter. Larger particle can penetrate only to the upper part of our nozzle. Some particle between 5 micron can go up to the upper respiratory, and 2.5 can go deep into our lungs. Now, we do have mechanism to protect us in our body. Your eyelashes, your hair in your nose, the mucus. If any one of you experience a dust storm or been in a dust, you would want to spit and want to clean your nose, because these are cleaning mechanism and a way for us to protect ourselves. But the smaller the particle can get inside the lungs and also inside the alveoli. And these are things we have been seeing. These are lung samples or lung tissue from American troops who were deployed in the Mediterranean. And several years after they came back, we can see these particles in their lungs. So these things can come in. So how do we examine the impact of dust on health? The most common way is epidemiological study. Now, there's three different methods. Epidemiological studies is mainly a statistical analysis. You look at the particulate matter, you compare it to how many people came to the ER, how many people went to see a doctor, and what we know from the literature that there's more people coming to visit the ER after dust event. There's demand for asthma medication. There's an increase in children visit to doctors, issues with COPD and ammonia, impact on people, on women, date of birth and low birth rate. So there are a lot of statistical analysis that we can do to look at the impact on dust of health. And this has been done worldwide. The other method to look at the impact of dust on health is in vivo, which is exposure of dust particle to animal to look at the impact, or in vitro, exposure of dust to human lung cells. And you look at the interaction. Most of the tissue culture are done in a tissue culture progress. Now, what is the problem with dust and health? Obviously, we don't want to breathe these in. We saw that a lot of epidemiological studies are showing that there's some impact. But what we've seen, if we really look close at the literature, we see that some studies show a positive correlation, so dust impact on health, and other don't really find a very strong correlation. And for me, I was very curious to know why. Why some dust is toxic and other don't? Can that help us to predict in a specific location where we should be impacted by this dust event? So this, one of the reasons that led me to develop the single cell analysis technique. I was a postdoc at Harvard Medical School in a system biology group, and I really was trying to bring together the atmospheric science with biology. For those of you who have never taken a biology class, this is how a cell looks like. This is the cytoplasm, and here we have the nuclei. For this project, we are using a lung epithelial cell called A549, and this has been common in many studies that use it to examine the impact of dust or aerosol on health. So what is so special about this method? We can look at every cell individually over time. Every cell is different, like we're different. We're not alike. So our cell is also not the same, and they can behave in a different way. Now, this original work is published in Environmental Research, so you're more than welcome to go and look into it. Now, what can we get from the single cell technique is we can monitor the behavior of each individual cell over time. We can identify the interaction each cell had with the dust particle, detect the exact time of death. And I want to emphasize that because that's important. Most of the technique that people have done in the past would take thousands of cells in one plate and count how many cells died after 6, 12, 24 hours. We don't know what's happening in between. Most of the cell could have done in the first hour, but we would not know that until we detect the impact of after the 6 hours, for example. So with this technique, we can look at each cell individually, and we can also identify what killed the cells, or I should be more specific and say, How did the cell die? What mechanism caused for them to die? So some of the challenges that has been with this technique, which I think why no one has done it in the past, was that when we look at low correlation of dust, and these are the cells, and I'm just going to add the particle, and you can see them in white, we can still see the cells moving, we can detect them, but at higher concentration, we can't really see anything. So being in a system biology group was a great chance because they've been already using a nuclear marker to add it into their cell. And this is a fluorescent protein. So now, even if I'm adding the nuclear marker, and I'm adding the cells, I can still track the cells and I can still see them. So I can really detect on the impact. So what are the kind of information we're getting? Normally, we would look at the nuclei to identify if the cell remained alive or if it died. And here is an example of when the cell remain alive, it's keep its rounded shape and it's just moving. The cell can divide, which is a normal mechanism that we have in our body. For example, if you have a cut, the cell will divide to close that gap. But we've also been seeing this. And these explosions are one type of death. So we can detect when the cell change their nuclei and when they're dying. And this one's also going to explode in a second. There we go. So we can really detect that. Now, we were really curious to see, are the particle impacting on the cell? Is it really relate to that? So we're using different concentration of a particle to see if it impact on the depth. And what we've noticed is that the cells are engulfing the particles. So here we have a cell and here's the nuclei. Now, once we start to see a shift in the change in the shape of the nuclei, we know something is happening. So monitor the cell, and these are all the particles. So the cell is doing phagocytosis. It's taking the particle. Sometimes it's absorbed it. Someone had just put it on the back. Sometimes it's just sharing with other sisters. But we see that when it's doing it, it starts to change the shape of the cell, the nuclei, and in a second, this cell is also going to die. Here we go. It died. We examined that and we counted how many particles the cell took, and we found that when the cell take more particles, when they engulf more particle, it increased the chance of dying. Now, I should mention, these cells are not supposed to do that. These are not this type of cell who's supposed to take particles, because we do have macrophages. That's their mechanism. They take dirt from our blood and try to clean our body. These cells not supposed to do that, which is a different aspect of like, why are they taking it? Here's another way of looking at this. I'm going to show you this video. Look here at the centers. We're going to add the particle and look at how the cells are cleaning the plate of that we have with the particle. Now, what we did was we looked at every cell that died, and we really wanted to know what would be the fate of the cells. So some cells survived, and even they were impacted by these dust particles. Some of them stopped dividing because division is something normal, and some of them died, and we examined two different types of death. These two different types of death are crucial to understand the toxicity aspect. Necrosis is the explosion that I showed you earlier when the dust is released into the bloodstream, and or basically everything in the cell, including the dust, released into the bloodstream, and that can cause inflammation, which can end up as an asthma attack. Apoptosis is a more programmed death where the cell maintain all the material in apoptotic bodies, and that doesn't cause inflammation. So the necrosis is more spontaneous and the apoptosis is more programmed. Just to show you how these things look like, we have apoptotic here and necrosis here. So I'll just show that again, two apoptotic bodies versus to the explosion of necrosis. Now, when we examine the type of death as a function of dust concentration, and you can see here the percentage of cells that die and how they die in blue apoptosis and in red necrosis. As we increase the dust concentration, we see that the number of cells that die from apoptosis decrease, but as we increase, we also see more necrosis. So we are increasing our chance for an asthma attack or inflammation when we have higher concentration. Some examples that we have here from our measurement, from our station. So this is a work that's been done by Sienja, who's a PhD student in my group. And we were able to collect a particle on the TISH, high volume sampler, and you can see the sample from the dust day or the non-dust day. These are the different size distribution on both days. So there's more larger particles on the dust day compared to the clean day. But again, this is where the 1 micron is. So there's still some small, higher concentration of particle during the dust day at smaller sizes. These are the particulate matter changes in concentration in PM 2.5 in green and PM 10 in red. So more particle during the dust day as we expected. Now, when we expose the cells to this different particle at different concentration, and we examined their death as a function of time. So we used the single cell, but then we looked how many died after the 24 hours, how many died after 48 hours, how many died after 72 hours. So we definitely see an impact. More cell will die over time. And this can happen in our body. That's why in some of the studies, we don't see a direct impact. You didn't breathe the dust and had an asthma attack. It takes some time for those things to happen in your body. But we definitely see that the dust is more toxic. It causes more death compared to the non-dust day. And this is something we're now hoping to take and examine the chemical composition of these particles and look more closely to understand what makes some of these dust to be more toxic. It could also be biological aspect. We have measured during dust here and we found a lot of fungi and a lot of bacteria in the air. Just to show you another sort of follow-up aspect that we're doing, we have soil sample from various locations across the world. And if you have one and you're willing to share, we'll be more than happy to have some samples. We are using this technique. In this case, we have done cell population, which is the old regular technique when we just put the cells with the dust and just count after 24 hours. I'm hoping that we'll be able to get funding to move this to the single cell. So these are the different samples location that we have from across Africa, because we were really curious to see if there's similarity there. You can see that they have different color because they have different mineralogy. Some of them have more iron, some of them have less iron. And when we compare the percentage of cell death, we really see this diverse. Some were not toxic, hello, and other were really toxic. So we still didn't point in directly to what makes dust toxic, but this is something that I'm hoping we'll be able to do. So how do we move forward? The most important thing, we need awareness. We need to start talking to people. We need to start mentioning the fact that dust is important. We don't need to wait until dust will reach Washington, D.C. like happened in the Dust Bowl, and then people realize, oh, there's a problem. We need to start talking about it. We need to start bringing more awareness to it. Obviously, there is a need for consistent, more frequent measurement, mainly in dust effluence area. I'm hoping that with our database, we will be able to create more way of people doing more research and helping to improve our knowledge on the impact of dust. People don't take the dust in the US as an important and a problematic aspect, and it is. And as you know, climate change predicts that it's just going to get worse. We live in these places. We want to be sure to be safe. We definitely need more types of measurement. There's barely any location that measures side distribution or composition. We don't really have that knowledge, and it would be great if we can have that. When we wrote this paper, we thought, we know that putting instrumentation across the US would be very problematic. They're very expensive. So we thought, oh, maybe low-cost sensor could be a solution. Unfortunately, the current low-cost sensor doesn't have the ability to measure in an accurate way the concentration of PM10. So none of the existing sensor is good enough for a dust event. And we're hoping that there will be, people who will start to think about that and develop this next generation of low-cost sensor that we can spread across urban location or rural location to create this network of sensor to be able to detect dust more accurately. Having these measurement will allow us to look at the impact of air quality. And I'm hoping that with the low-cost sensor, we can get short time interval. And we need that short time interval because most of our dust in the US lasts less than an hour. And we need to see and need to understand the impact. Obviously, we need more studies. We need to show, we need to come up with more studies that will impact or examine the impact these dust events have on health. And maybe through that, we will be able to convince some people higher up that dust is important. And we definitely need to rethink how we now look at these events because we underestimate the impact they have. So with that, I would like to start with acknowledging our NSF, our funding agency, NSF, allowing us to create this database. the CH Foundation, who provided us with the Microsoft, and most importantly, none of this work can be done without great team. And I am very proud to have very great student. So you can see most of the student that has been involved or currently involved in these projects. And I'm hoping that, who knows, maybe some of them will be the next scientists that will lead and let us learn some of this information for the US or for around the world. So with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to take any question if there are.
Excellent. Thanks, Karin. It's always great to see your work. Appreciate that. Are there questions? We've got, looks like, some applause from the audience for that talk.
Thank you.
We have a couple of comments. Things are filling up in the chat here. Let's see. Let me get back. Meredith, did you want to get on and talk about your question regarding statistical significance? No, they're still here. I can just read it. Oh,
well, I guess I can. I mean, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, we can.
I just think it's misleading because certainly the one that showed a big jump from early in the few years that were shown to the later in the few years are shown, that's a change that the regression is not, sure, it's statistically significant, but it doesn't mean anything. It's not a trend, it's a jump. It's like a 2-point average. That's what I'm trying to say is it's not a big deal. Nobody made it a big deal. I just don't think I think it's misleading to call it significant. That's it.
Well, I did not say that. I'd be happy to follow up with you and get more clarification on what you mean. We don't say that it's statistically significant. We just say that it's significant increase or decrease. But I'll be happy to follow up to understand, because I'm not sure I'm 100% understand the what do you mean.
There's another comment. Which is,
we can follow up later.
Sounds good.
With respect, from Jessica, with respect to overall dust impact on human health, was human behavior taken into account? For example, people more able to move indoors during short dust events than longer dust events?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I can tell you that from my experience, the dust can get into the house. During COVID, we shut down our station, so I moved it to my house, and I had measurement in my living room and measurement that taking from the outside, and we saw dust inside the house. There are not that many measurement indoor, but it's more of a behavioral. I don't think anyone has ever examined that aspect, and that would be an excellent social study. But this is one of the things. This is my biggest recommendation, to tell people go indoor if there's a dust event.
Armando had a comment that Westar held an exceptional event workshop last week in St. Louis, and he's got a link there to check out more information on that. I see your hands up too, Armando. Did you want to comment any further on that?
Sure. Thank you. It's nice to see everyone here today. Great presentation, Karin.
Thank you.
And so I always learn so much information from your talks, and so just wanted to kind of reiterate the fact that for like exceptional events data, I just wanted to just kind of clarify that the data isn't like I guess you can say removed, but it's considered to be excluded. So I guess you can say the difference is that the data is still there. It's just that the data, once it's excluded, it's no longer, I guess you can say, upheld to like the regulatory requirements. So there is a big, like long, drawn out process that we have to go through to be able to get that data excluded. And there is like a public comment process whenever we draft those documents. And then a big component of being able to get that data excluded is to have a dust mitigation plan, which does provide certain protections for the public with notification and advisories and whatnot. So just kind of wanted to bridge that gap a little bit, and then just also kind of just reiterate the fact that dust is pretty ambivalent as far as the way seen in general. Like for example, this exceptional events workshop, they pretty much primarily focused on wildfire smoke. So as far as dust goes, I mean, it was like not even really mentioned, if even at all. And so I just kind of wanted to, just reiterate that. So anybody that has more information about exceptional events, I mean, that was a good, I guess you could say, workshop. And so I still need to check out a bunch of those talks myself to get myself up to speed. Thank you.
Thank you. Scott, you have your hand up.
Hi, thanks so much for the talk. So my name is Scott Epstein. I work for the South Coast Air Quality Management District. So we're like the regulatory agency overseeing kind of the LA Metro. And we do a lot of exceptional events work. PM10 events are one of them. And I guess that was Armando. Like, I actually wrote down some notes and he covered a lot of things I wanted to talk about. But I'd probably say that exceptional events get a lot more attention than a regular event. So like we do advise, the difference is that our main tool for mitigation is exposure reduction as opposed to emission reduction because they're sort of out of our control. So us and other agencies do air quality advisories, alerts, forecasting, media interviews. Like we try and get people the information to reduce their exposure. So we do pay a lot of attention to them.
Also to dust?
Yes, exactly. To dust as well.
Good.
Yeah. Dust and smoke and high ozone. But yeah, I this year I've done like 20 interviews about high PM10 concentrations. So, due to dust events. So like it's definitely in the news. We try and get the word out. An exceptional event demonstration. So there are hundreds of pages, right? So we have to do like significant retrospective analysis. And as part of that, we need to show that the events aren't reasonably controllable or preventable. So meaning that a dust event that's mainly anthropogenic in origin, it does not qualify as an exceptional event. And then if these events get concurred by the EPA, they meet all this criteria. As Armando said, like, the data gets excluded when we calculate our design values and compare it to the standards, which sort of makes sense because those design values are there to kind of force us to regulate. And if it's something that we can't regulate, like why, right? But we also keep track of those numbers. It's still the numbers are still in the data. They're not like crossed off the record, right? Like they're still available and people still use them. And then I think that covered everything I wanted to say. But I want to thank you for the presentation because I feel like I learned a lot. It was incredibly interesting. So thanks.
Thanks, Scott. Bernie's wondering if wearing of a mask is useful during these events.
Definitely. It's something that started to come up after COVID, that there's some of the recommendation have been to, if you have to be outside during a dust event, then just have a mask on to make sure these small particles will not get into your lungs. So yeah, definitely. But just don't go outside. Start with that.
Ramesh, do you have a question?
Yes. Thank you, Karin, for giving interesting talk. I want to find out what are the sources of this dust, what you measure. And I was looking at the image, what I found that there is dust on April 19th and June 5th. One is coming from the northern side, other one is coming from the southern side. Okay, so I wanted to know this, and then I would like to know whether at the same time you measure the ozone, surface ozone, or carbon monoxide, okay, water vapor. Because I have experience in India, okay, and in India, most of the dusts are coming from the westerly wind. The source is a local source, could be Thar Desert, could be Arabia Peninsula. So there, water vapor enhanced, and also the total the ozone column also change, and the carbon monoxide also changed. So I would like to know what is your experience there?
I wish really this city has a single EPA sensor, one PM 2.5. And now, hopefully in a few weeks, there'll be another one in my station. We don't have any other measurement. Any gases are not measured here. No ozone measurement, no CO2, no SO2. We have nothing. So unfortunately, I cannot tell you that, but it would be a nice way to examine in other locations where they have those sensors. For the dust event, yes, both of them came from the west, but one from southwest and one of them directly from the west. And the sources in our area for Lubbock, we have a lot of agriculture. So it's high likely that the source is agriculture. In other places in the US, it might be different. So that, could have an impact on these particles, on
It
their
is
chemistry,
different.
but we don't have that information yet. That's why we need more measurement.
Maybe the air mass is coming, okay, and those air mass is bringing the dust at your station. Okay, so maybe this is a long range transport of dust, okay, from different sources.
Could be.
Thank
Okay,
you.
Thanks, Ramesh. I think we'll probably wrap up unless there's any I don't see any other questions in the chat, or there's one comment that synoptically driven dust episodes picked up from northern Chihuahuan Desert for the Lubbock region often. Don't see any other questions. Anybody else before I share our final thing? Thanks again, Karin. Lots of thank you, wonderful talk, comments in the chat you can look at.